First of all, let us give thanks to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala for His blessings and gift so that we are still given health until now. Don't forget to salawat and salam to our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the Prophet who has brought us from the realm of darkness to the brightness. Okay, let me introduce myself. I'm Nirmala Amir from PBIB, a student at the State Islamic University of Alauddin Makassar, majoring in English Education Department, and now I'm in the 5th semester. As for this video, it was made to fulfill the final assignment for the curriculum and material development in ELT course, of which there are 3 phases that we will discuss in this video. The first is the preliminary phase, how to manage need analysis. In the preliminary phase, there are 3 stages need to be done. The first is making decision on need analysis, the second is gathering information in need analysis, and the last stage is using the information in need analysis. The next phase is the development phase. In the development phase, there are 3 stages need to be considered. The first is selecting and organizing course contents. The second is developing the teaching materials, and the third is reviewing and validating the teaching materials. And the last phase is the review phase. In this phase, there are also 3 points to be discussed. The first is teaching instructional materials. The second is evaluating learning outcomes. The third is summative evaluation. Alright, let's just move on to the first material, the preliminary phase. Well, in the preliminary phase, we will discuss how to manage need analysis. To carry out a needs analysis, there are 3 stages need to be considered. The first is making decision about the needs analysis, the second is gathering information, and the last is using the information. Alright, straight away, the first is making decision about the need analysis. There are several parts need to be considered in making a decision, namely who will be involved in the needs analysis, what type of information should be collected, and what point of view should be presented. Okay, the first one is who will be involved in the need analysis. At this stage, we must first determine the target group to whom we will request information, for example, students in a program, teachers, administrators, and the graduates. The second is the audience, namely the people who will ultimately be asked to act based on the analysis, such as teachers, teachers' assistants, program administrators, or supervisors in the bureaucracy above the language program. The third is the needs analyst, the person responsible for conducting the needs analysis. The fourth is the search group, people who serve as sources of information about the target group, for example, parents, potential employers, or professors of a student content course. After determining the people who will be involved in the need analysis, the next step is to decide what kind of information is needed in the needs analysis. Okay, the next point is determine the type of information needed in a need analysis. There are 4 philosophies to consider when gathering this type of information. The first is discrepancy philosophy. Information that perceives students' needs inconsistent with that they are doing. For example, we can ask 2 questions that can be used for comparison. For example, the first question might be, how important do you think learning speaking skills is in an English education program? Then, the second question reads, how often do you use English in everyday life? From the answer to these 2 questions, we can later find out whether their desires are proportional to what they are doing or even not appropriate. Democratic philosophy. Information that views needs as the most desired by the majority of the group, the most desirable learning. For example, we can ask about how they improve their speaking skills. Okay, the next philosophy is analytic philosophy. Information on the acquisition of a second language. For example, we can ask how they got their second language. And the next philosophy is diagnostic philosophy. Information that views needs as the most important language skill needed by students. For example, we can ask how important vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation are in the process of learning to speak. Okay, the next step is to present the types of information in the form of a questionnaire. Okay, the second stage is gathering information about needs analysis. This stage is the stage where the process of collecting analysis data and processing data from questionnaires is carried out. There are two important things that must be done, namely distributing questionnaires to needs analysis participants and processing data from questionnaires and other necessary instruments so that the collected data is included in the needs inventory. Before distributing the questionnaires, we first need to carry out the process of gathering information through selecting the types of questions. There are 5 types of questions. The first is the question of identifying the problem. This type of question is given to identify the problem that is being experienced by the target group. The second is a priority questions. This type of question usually investigates what topics, language use, and skills the target group considers most important for learning. The third is the questions of ability. This type of questions focus on students' abilities. The fourth is the questions of attitude. Questions were made to reveal information about participants' feelings and attitudes towards program elements. The fifth is the question of solution, a question that brings a solution to a problem. After considering the types of questions to be used in the needs analysis questionnaire, the needs analyst must determine the most appropriate instrument for gathering needs analysis information. There are 6 categories of instrumentation: available information, tests, observation, interviews, meetings, and questionnaires. A data collected from the introductory questions was used to indicate the participant's situation, example gender and age, and the perception of the importance of the availability English education study program. In addition, the 2 types of information, linguistic needs and learning needs, were analyzed into 3 categories identified as level of proficiency, level of importance, and level of frequency. To clarify the presentation of the data, some data were analyzed using diagrams to see the distribution of the frequency level and the level of importance using language skill. The entire data is then analyzed to find out an inventory of needs of the target group in language learning, which is then used as a basis for formulating the aims and objectives of learning and designing a one-syllabus speaking course. The third is using the information. Information obtained from the questionnaire data that has been carried out will be used to create a curriculum and syllabus and can also be used as a basis for developing test materials, teaching activities, and evaluation strategies. In other words, the needs analysis will form a rational basis for all other curriculum components and syllabus designed for a given language program. Formulating needs inventory. The first, needs inventory from the linguistic needs. Identification of linguistic needs is done by analyzing students' learning abilities and learning priorities. The result of the analysis are used to prioritize the components of speaking skills and choose the appropriate teaching materials needed to design the syllabus for speaking course. The second is needs inventory from the learning needs. Learning needs student. This study were identified by analyzing learning problems and student learning attitudes. Student learning problems are described based on the analysis of respondents' perception, student lecture and graduates, about barriers to student learning success to be able to speak effectively in speaking subject. Meanwhile, to explain student attitudes, the author analyzed student preferences and learning styles based on respondents' perception because these two factors are believed to influence student attitudes in learning. Okay, the next is formulating goals and objectives. Things that need to be considered in determining goals and objectives are: the first is identifying student learning abilities in speaking. The second is determine which language components are most needed to be learned as a priority. The third is identifying the most preferred real-life topics and basis grammar. The fourth is identify the obstacle or problems that are most experienced by students. And the last is identify the learning preferences and learning styles that are most preferred by students. Okay, the second phase is development phase. In the development phase, there are three stages that need to be considered. The first is selecting and organizing course content. Selecting syllabus content. In this section, the selection of syllabus content is done by selecting the main topics and determining the order in which the topics will be presented in class. As for how to determine the main topic according to Richards, 2001, that information collected during needs analysis contributes to the planning of course content, as do additional ideas from other researchers, such as available literature on the topic, published materials on the topic, reviewing the course. Similar from and elsewhere, reviewing tests or exam in the area, analyzing student problems, consulting with teachers who are familiar with the topic, as well as consulting with specialists in the area. The result of the needs analysis and consultation can then be made into a list of topics. After knowing how to choose the main topic, the next step is to determine the order of the topics. According to Richard 2001, the order of content in a course can be determined based on the following criteria. The first is simple to complex. Previously presented content is taught more simply than later items. The second is chronology. Content is sorted according to the order in which events occur in the real world. The third is needs. Content is ordered according to when students are most likely to need it outside of class. The fourth is prerequisite learning. The sequence of content reflects what is needed at one point as a foundation for the next step in the learning process. And the last is whole to part or part to whole. In some cases, material at the beginning of a course may focus on the overall structure or organization of a topic before considering the individual components that make up it. Alternatively, the course focuses on practicing the parts before the whole. And the next is spiral sequencing, recycling items to ensure that learners have repeat opportunities to study them. Okay, the next point is planning course structure or designing syllabus. The idea of designing of a course syllabus can be started by choosing a syllabus framework, which usually has a close relationship with the development of teaching materials based on the formulated syllabus framework. In planning the course structure or syllabus, it could be arranged based on student needs. For example, in the speaking course, students need include how to introduce themselves, then get to know and introduce their family members, tell about their daily habits personally, explain their responsibilities in the family, tell about activities carried out in their spare time in the family environment, outside the family environment, then the need to interact with the environment at home. The second is developing the teaching materials. There are two procedures that must be considered. The first is how to write a lesson plan in a language program. Lesson plans function to identify learning objectives and mark routes, activities for each stage of learning. Brown 2001 proposed 6 important elements that must be considered in preparing lesson plans. Namely, the first, goals. The second, objectives. The third, materials and equipment. The fourth is procedure. The fifth is evaluation, and the last is extra classwork. Defining a teaching plan will keep both teachers and students focused on their goals, how they will get there, and what must be accomplished when they arrive. Okay, the next is determine the organizational structure of the teaching materials. Teaching materials, uh, then this section will develop based on the result of the needs analysis that had previously been transformed into the syllabus and lesson plan. The organizational structure of teaching materials for this research is planned by units, where each unit represents a topic and consists of 3 lessons. Lessons identify as lesson gaining skills, lesson. The second is using skills and lessons, and the last is review. The third is reviewing and validating the teaching materials. The review of teaching materials is carried out by providing instruments used to examine the elements of teaching materials, namely content, language, components, activities, and complementary materials. Contents. Contents refer to the subject or topics covered in the teaching materials. To evaluate the effectiveness of the content of teaching materials, there are several comprehensive statements that can be given regarding the content review, including diversity of topics, relevance of topics to levels and needs, contribution of topics to the development of language skills, and originality of material in topics. The next is language components. Language components refer to vocabulary, include pronunciation, word class, meaning, and diction, grammar, sentence construction rules, and language function, the use of language in social context. Activities. Activities can be defined as action of learning process carried out to achieve certain goals. Action in this case refers to the opportunities provided to encourage student participation in the achievement of knowledge by collecting information and processing it by doing assignment and tests in the class. Supplementary materials. Supplementary materials refer to instruments or media that are added to support and enhance teaching activities. Some suggest statements regarding the review of complementary materials are instrument or media to learn certain language components. Availability of handouts. There are several handouts for each lesson. And the last is availability of authentic materials such as photos. And the last phase is the review phase. In the review phase, there are 3 stages that we will discuss. Namely, the first is teaching instructional materials. In the teaching instructional materials, there are several parts. There is how to decide the instructional materials to be presented. Determine 3 topics and are chosen randomly among the 11 topics of teaching materials developed. The next is the 3 topics selected to be tested in the classroom are used as example of implementation procedure in the review phase. The next is each topic is implemented in 2 general sections with specific time allocation and procedure for each. The next point is to determine the procedure in teaching the instructional materials. The first is the implementation of the course content usually takes place for 3 consecutive hours involving 15 students. The second is the implementation of the evaluation aims to test the effect of teaching materials on increasing the communicative competence of the target students after going through the trial procedure. Therefore, the evaluation is carried out immediately after the implementation step is carried out. Okay, the second is evaluating learning outcomes. How to decide the use of formative or summative evaluation. Summative evaluation refers to checking what has been learned at a certain point in time. namely at the end of the course. It's based on cumulative learning experiences, tests for achievement, and mastery of specific performance goals. While formative evaluation focuses on determining which aspects of the design are working well or not, and why. This evaluation occurs during the redesign and provides information for incrementally improving the interface. In other words, formative evaluation is used in an iterative process to make improvements before production, and summative evaluation is used to evaluate the delivered product compared to benchmark. Okay, the third point is summative evaluation. According to uh, Kirkpatrick, summative evaluation can be carried out in four main levels, namely the first is reaction. The first level of evaluation is done by assessing students' reaction or attitudes toward the learning experience. The most appropriate instrument for this level is a questionnaire to find out whether the student like to learn from the instruction given or not. The second is learning. This level aims to measure what students have learned from the materials presented by comparing their performance before and after receiving instruction. Giving pre-test and post-test is considered very effective to show that learning has occurred as a result of instruction. The third is behavior. At this level of evaluation, teachers need to be involved in the determining that students can actually use everything they have learned from the material. To evaluate this, the lecturer review learning outcomes by assessing student performance with respect to instruction. Questionnaires were also given to teachers to obtain information. And the last is result. After conducting the previous three levels of evaluation, the effectiveness of the communicative competency-based syllabus designed for one speaking course, independent variable, can be measured in two aspects, namely the influence of instructional design on student achievement, where the syllabus improve its communicative competence, dependent variable, based on student responses, the result of the pre-test and post-test, as well as the lecture perception of student performance. When the evaluation levels comes to decide whether the results of the previous evaluation procedure indicate that the training program has achieved its objectives, the material is revisited and transformed into a syllabus design that is ready to be used in an actual educational context. After going through the review stage, the syllabus design becomes a communicative competency-based syllabus designed for undergraduate students. Well, as for the conclusion, that is to develop a curriculum, we need to pay attention to several stages that need to be done, namely needs analysis, formulation of learning objectives, preparation of syllabus, implementation of teaching materials, and evaluation. I hope that with some of my previous brief explanation, it can help teachers to find effective ways to design a syllabus. And thanks to our lecturer, Dr. Kaharuddin SIPM, who has taught us in the curriculum and material development in ELT course, and thanks also to him for publishing the book Syllabus Design for English Language Teaching, in which the book has become a guide. I'm working on this video. Well, maybe that's all from me. Thank you for all your attention, and sorry for all the shortcomings in this video. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.